causing our body to release the acetylcholine. The norepinephrine comes from the sympathetic postganglionic neurons. Something that puts out norepinephrine, which is also noradrenaline, is called an adrenergic fiber, and things that receive this are called adrenergic receptors. There are alpha adrenergic receptors and beta adrenergic receptors. Essentially type A alpha and type B beta. So alpha adrenergic receptors are excitatory, and then there are actually subclasses of these. These are second messenger receptors. But remember, we had those where they don't open the channel themselves, they kind of pass the signal along to another protein that's going to open a channel. So because these two subclasses use different second messengers, there are actually two subclasses of alpha. This is not that important of a detail for you. Then there are the beta adrenergic receptors, which are inhibitory. Then there are two subclasses of these. So the autonomic nervous system is also going to affect glands, right? This is not just organs, but glands also. But the effect on the gland is usually indirect. These nerves aren't going to directly stimulate a gland. They're going to change the blood flowing into that gland, and by doing that, we're able to control what comes out of the gland. And so if we send a signal that causes vasodilation, so make the blood vessels bigger. If that happens, we get more blood going into the gland. And if we have more blood going into the gland, we're able to get more coming out of the gland. Opposite, if we send a signal to cause vasoconstriction, we essentially cut off the blood supply to that gland. If it doesn't have much blood, it doesn't have any ingredients to make anything. If it has enough blood to survive, it's not going to die, but it doesn't have the supplies to do what it's made to do. If we look at how long the effects of these processes last, effects of the sympathetic system tend to be longer than parasympathetic effects. And that's because, essentially due to what happens to the neurotransmitters. So norepinephrine comes out of the sympathetic nervous system. So it's going to be reabsorbed by the nerve. It can just kind of diffuse away and go off into the distance. And some of it is going to just go into the bloodstream and get carried away. So none of those are going to happen very quickly. The acetylcholine, which comes from the parasympathetic nerves, is very unstable. It just breaks apart on its own. So it gets released, it creates a signal for a short period of time, and then it breaks down. Not only do we have things, not only are the responses based on the expression or the release of acetylcholine and norepinephrine, but we can also release other things into the synapse along with those neurotransmitters that are going to affect the ability of acetylcholine and norepinephrine to do those things. You don't need to know these names, but just notice that there's a large number of things that we can secrete. And each one of those things can be secreted and have a different effect. Substance P always sounds like something out of a superhero movie. Parasympathetic nerves not only can have an effect based on changing blood flow of things, but we can also stimulate the production of nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is going to cause vasodilation. So if we have nitric oxide in our body, a lot of the blood vessels in our body are going to expand. Now, I don't suggest inhaling nitric oxide, but there are people that do that. Nitric oxide is a laughing gas, right? If you go to the dentist can give it to you in a very controlled manner, right? So it has other effects in our body, but the primary effect is dilating blood vessels. If you dilate blood vessels, that's going to change the way that your brain is going to work, and changing the amount of nitric oxide in our body is actually how Viagra has its main effect. Okay, so here we have a parasympathetic fiber. So this is a very nice summary slide. I really like this figure. So we have parasympathetic nerve fiber. Okay, so we have the preganglionic neuron. Notice the preganglionic neuron is long. Then we have acetylcholine being released by that, being received by a nicotinic receptor on the short postganglionic neuron, then uses acetylcholine to pass the signal onto the target cell that receives it with a muscarinic receptor. Down here, we have the two types of sympathetic fibers, sympathetic adrenergic, sympathetic cholinergic. In both cases, the preganglionic neuron is short, the postganglionic neuron is long. Preganglionic neuron releases acetylcholine. They always do, up here and down here. The preganglionic neuron always releases acetylcholine. But here, postganglionic neuron, these also have nicotinic receptors because they're going to receive acetylcholine. But then down here is splits. We can either give off acetylcholine again, or we can give off norepinephrine. So if we give off norepinephrine, the target cell must have an adrenergic receptor. If we give off acetylcholine, we can have either a nicotinic or a muscarinic receptor to receive that signal. Does that make sense? I would really focus on all the details in that. I think that's a very important slide. So this system, having the sympathetic, parasympathetic, being able to give off multiple neurotransmitters and having multiple receptors to receive them, is what's going to allow us to have this dual innervation. And dual innervation is when you have an organ or a system that's controlled by both the sympathetic and the parasympathetic division. Like I said before, in most cases, they're going to have antagonistic effects. They're going to try to make the organ do opposite things. So the organ will be controlled by whichever is stronger at a given time. But in some situations, there's going to be cooperative effects, where they're both telling the organ to do the same thing. In most cases, each organ, even though it's dually innervated, is primarily controlled by one or the other. So the parasympathetic system is the primary control system of the digestive tract. So we said the sympathetic division will cut off blood supply to them. But cutting off blood supply to them isn't really controlling them. The parasympathetic division is going to be more or less control of the digestive organs. It's just the sympathetic division has veto power. It can come in and say, yes, go about doing your thing, but I'm not going to give you any blood to do it with. Right? It's like taking a department and saying, I'm not going to remove this department, but I'm not going to give you any money to run your department, so good luck with that. Whereas the sympathetic division is going to have a greater effect on the heart contractions. And so the parasympathetic division is going to have an effect on it. It's always going to be trying to pull it back to that normal heart rate. But that pull force is not very strong. As soon as you have the sympathetic division kicking in, it's going to take over. So that's why people who are constantly stressed, right? I mean, we all have a lot of constant stress. That's one reason that our blood pressure can be too high, It's because even though we're not in a fight or flight danger, we're going to die any second now situation, having that low level stress constantly keeps that sympathetic division constantly running. And even just a little bit of sympathetic signal is enough to overcome that parasympathetic division. And so our blood rate, our heart rate comes up a little bit, and if the heart rate comes up a little bit, our blood pressure goes up.
In this class, I'm always sympathetic.
And when you take your exam, you hope I'm sympathetic, right? So if you have antagonistic effects, this is going to be dual innervation, but they're going to be coming into the same effector cell. And so this is imagine what's going on in our heart. And so we have one cell in our body what's going to control our heart contracting, and it's going to receive signals from both the parasympathetic and the sympathetic division. One cell is going to receive signals from both. And it's going to, based on which one's stronger at a given time, it's going to listen to that one. But you can also have antagonistic effects if you have two different cells which serve different purposes. They have different functions, but in the end, they have the same effect. And so, in your heart, you have cardiac muscle cells, and they contract. All you can do is control how much they're contracting. So those cardiac muscle cells are going to receive signals from both. But in your eye, you have different systems. What controls contraction and dilation of your pupil are different muscles. And so you can actually control those separately. And so you can activate one and activate the other, and they're both going to pull. One is trying to contract, one is trying to dilate. Whichever one is stronger is going to win. It's not one cell saying, okay, I'm receiving instructions from two people, which one am I going to listen to? It's Foster and I both grabbing the same thing and pulling in opposite directions and seeing which one of us is stronger at that time.
So then, but
Parker, not Foster. Last name.
Either way. I get it a lot.
Do you want to go by Foster?
Either way, I get it a lot. Two last names.
The people call me Stephen Jahn, so neither one's right.
So then for the first one, that's the one where it's the one cell, and if it gets information from both.
Right. And so it's like, I'm up here, and I got to decide, do I want to go left? Do I want to go right? And you are both yelling at me.
Okay.
One's telling me to go left, one's telling me to go right. And whichever one seems angrier, I'm going to listen to you, right?
Okay.
As opposed to two different people pulling. Let's say I'm here, one person here, one person here. They're trying to pull me left and right.
Okay.
And so which one is stronger? But you can actually have cooperative effects, where the sympathetic and the parasympathetic division are going to cause the same thing. And so this is an example of that. So salivation. And so in order to salivate, to make saliva, we need two different things. We need serous cells to secrete essentially this water, and we also need mucus cells to secrete mucus that's going to make saliva that kind of sticky, runny, slightly thick thing. It's not just water, right? And so the parasympathetic system is going to increase the secretion of serous fluid, which is going to contain things like the water and all the digestive enzymes in our saliva. But the sympathetic nervous system is going to increase the mucus secretion that goes into that saliva. So they're both going to activate at the same time, and that's going to cause more and more salivation. And so if you had a situation where only one was active and the other, you still might salivate, but it might be very, very runny, or you might be like a St. Bernard and lots of mucus. Right? Slobby dogs. So the autonomic nervous system, we talked about what it does, where it goes. But it's actually regulated at several parts of the central nervous system. So the cerebral cortex, where is the cerebral cortex? It's the brain part. So the cerebrum is the big brain part. Where's the cortex?
Top of it.
It's the, yeah, kind of the outside top part of it. So this is going to be the primary control of anger, fear, and anxiety. And these are emotional reactions, right? And emotions are going to be coming from the limbic system and the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is also going to control things in our visceral system. Things that control our heart and our digestive system are primarily going to come from the hypothalamus. And there are different kind of bundles and locations in the hypothalamus called nuclei that specialize in individual functions. The midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata are going to control different things. So there are other nuclei in these places. So what I want you to notice is you have this list here, right? So anger is in the cerebral cortex. Nowhere in the medulla oblongata does it say anything about anger. So if you've ever seen The Waterboy, what was the reason they decided, at least Colonel Sanders decided, that alligators were so ornery?
Because the medulla oblongata.
Because they have a great big medulla oblongata. But what we just learned is the medulla oblongata does not control anger, which I would consider the same as being ornery, right? So if that's not the case, why do you think alligators are so ornery? Because they got all them teeth and no brush to brush it, right? Maybe Mama was right. Right? Colonel Sanders was wrong. I mean, he told them, Colonel Sanders, you're wrong.
Mama's right.
Mom was right. Yeah. How many people did I just confirm that yes, I'm in fact insane? Because once again, you did not get my reference at all.
I got it. Doesn't he get hit by a football later on in the movie?
Yeah.
He gets tackled.
He gets tackled.
Oh, yeah.
He gets tackled, and then later on, he's shown himself.
I thought you were looking for more like a scientific answer, so I didn't want to be like, oh, like Mama's teeth.
Mama said. Don't doubt Mama. So we don't have different water spigots in our lab. But in the chemistry lab, there's tap water, and then there is deionized water. And I always call it, people can't believe I just say it without even thinking, but I call the deionized water high-quality H2O. And so you've got tap water and high-quality H2O. And if you're going to use water for a reaction, you need the high-quality H2O from the side tap. So the midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata are going to control a bunch of these functions. And then there are also going to be things that are located, and they're going to come from the spinal cord. And so things like defecation are going to be controlled by the spinal cord. And these are going to be controlled by sphincters. So sphincters, we said, were smooth muscle that are able to contract things in our body. So kind of tube-shaped objects in our body, we can contract. Okay. Questions?